The calendar page turned to June 1942, but in the American psyche, the clock was still stuck on the morning of December 7, 1941. That day, Pearl Harbor lay like a deep, unhealed wound. 8 battleships sunk or crippled, thousands of our sailors and soldiers dead. Our nation, peace-loving, isolationist, was reeling from a catastrophic sucker punch delivered by the Empire of Japan. The wound was still fresh. Every family knew a victim. Every heart carried the shame of that surprise attack. We were not just fighting a war overseas. We were fighting to reclaim our dignity, to prove that the sleeping giant, once awakened, could not be put back down. The months that followed were a parade of humiliation. The Japanese Imperial Navy, the codebreakers, the greatest striking force the world had ever seen, a flawless war machine built around 6 magnificent fast carriers, seemed unstoppable. On May 30th, just 72 hours later, the Yorktown, still wounded, still smelling of burned steel, but afloat and operational, sailed out of Pearl Harbor, ready to fight. She was a ghost ship, a steel testament to the ferocious will of the American working man and woman. Her mere presence would prove decisive, forcing the Japanese to believe they were facing a full 3-carrier fleet. The American command: ice and fire. The carriers were organized into task forces, commanded by 2 very different men. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, the senior officer aboard Yorktown, steady, cautious, and respected. He was the anchor of the fleet, a man of experience and sound judgment. Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, a non-aviator aboard Enterprise, who had taken command after the beloved Admiral Bull Halsey fell ill with severe dermatitis. Spruance was cold, calculating, and methodical. He was utterly emotionless in a crisis, a man of quiet, scholarly logic. When the critical moment came, his professional, calculating nature would be the perfect counterpoint to the impetuous Japanese command. He would make the one decision that Halsey, known for his fiery risk-taking, might have hesitated to make. Our 3 carriers hid northeast of Midway, waiting. They maintained absolute radio silence, slipping into the ocean fog, invisible to the enemy's extensive radio monitoring. The Japanese fleet, confident, massive, and powerful, steamed toward the atoll, utterly unaware that our eyes were already watching them from the shadows, our trap set and waiting to be sprung. Part 4. The Hour of Agony, Nagumo's Fatal Choice. The morning of June 4, 1942, broke over the Central Pacific with clear, hard light. The wind was stiff, the visibility excellent, a perfect day for flying, a perfect day for war. The first wave and the decoy. At 4:30 a.m., Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, commander of the codebreakers, gave the order. A massive wave of 108 planes, fighters, bombers, and attack aircraft roared off the decks of the 4 carriers and headed east toward Midway Atoll. This was the first, crippling strike. Nagumo, adhering strictly to Japanese naval doctrine, kept his second strike wave armed and below deck. These planes were primarily armed with ship-killing ordnance, torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, ready to attack the American fleet once it was discovered. He was confident his strike force was hidden, and that the American fleet would not be found until well after the Midway attack was over. The first strike hit Midway. The island defenders, Marines, sailors, and airmen fought back with unbelievable ferocity. Their Wildcat and Buffalo fighters were hopelessly outmatched, their bomber attacks suicidal, yet they never wavered. They were the sacrifice, the distraction. They were buying precious minutes. The poison dart, a moment of doubt. The Japanese strike commander, Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, surveyed the damage and signaled back to Nagumo. There is a need for a second attack wave. The base was not neutralized. This simple message was the poisoned dart. Nagumo now faced an impossible dilemma, a strategic crossroad where every decision led to disaster. Rearm the second wave with land attack bombs for Midway. This would take over an hour and fill his hangars with highly volatile, high-explosive ordnance, making his carriers instant targets if an enemy were found. Wait for the inevitable discovery of the American fleet, gambling that they wouldn't arrive before the Midway planes returned. Nagumo hesitated. The American fleet was not yet discovered. Following doctrine, and still blinded by the certainty of their surprise, he ordered the second wave to be rearmed for land attack. The torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, the weapons for the Great Sea Battle, were wheeled off the planes, and fragmentation bombs were brought up from the magazines. The decks of Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiruyu became a dangerous, cluttered landscape of fuel hoses, ordnance carts, and planes being desperately prepared for battle. Fueling and rearming happened simultaneously. The air in the hangar decks grew thick and combustible with aviation fuel vapor. The ships were becoming floating bombs. The hammer blow. Discovery. The agonizing delay lasted less than an hour, but it cost the Japanese the war. At 7:28 a.m., a lumbering, magnificent PBY Catalina patrol plane, flying its grid 200 miles away, spotted the Japanese fleet. The radio operator's message, crackling into Midway and then on to our carriers, was succinct and terrifying. 2 carriers and battleships, course 090, speed 25. A second PBY quickly confirmed all 4 carriers. The air suddenly went electric. Nagumo knew the ambush was discovered, and we were coming for him. All the previous decisions were instantly, catastrophically wrong. At 7:45 a.m., Nagumo rescinded the previous order and gave the new, fatal command. Cessation of preparatory work. Rearm all aircraft with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs. The decks were thrown into an even greater state of chaos. Fumes filled the hangars. Bombs and torpedoes, land bombs mixed with sea bombs, were scattered everywhere. It was a chaotic, feverish effort to rearm for a sea battle before we arrived. But the clock, as we now know, had already run out for the codebreakers, and we were already on our way. Part 5. The Cost of Courage. The Torpedo Squadrons. Admiral Spruance had not waited for confirmation of all 4 carriers. The moment he had the first sighting report, he made a radical, courageous decision that defied every book of naval doctrine. He launched all available aircraft from Enterprise and Hornet at 7 a.m., even though he was outside the standard striking range and his squadrons would be poorly coordinated. He did not wait for his destroyers. He did not wait for a perfect formation. He just pushed the launch. Go. He knew the single absolute rule of a carrier battle. Hit the enemy carriers before they hit yours. The risk of losing planes to lack of fuel or coordination was secondary to the absolute necessity of striking first. The desperate, divided assault. The American strike force flew toward the target piecemeal, low on fuel and without sufficient fighter escort. They arrived first, and they arrived alone. The torpedo bombers were the sacrificial lambs of this glorious, desperate battle. These were the TBD devastators, obsolete, slow, barely 100 knots during the torpedo run, and unarmored, a nightmare to fly in combat against the lightning-fast Zero. The first to find the Japanese were 15 planes of Torpedo Squadron 8, VT-8, from the Hornet, led by the indomitable Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. He was a fighting Irishman, a man who possessed the kind of leadership that inspired fanatical devotion. Due to a tragic navigation error, or perhaps Waldron's intuition guiding them on a shorter, more direct path. They flew far off course and found the entire codebreakers alone, without their fighter escorts. He knew exactly what he was flying into. The torpedo run was the most dangerous maneuver in naval aviation. Slow and steady, right into the teeth of the enemy's air defense. He turned his squadron toward the Japanese line. His last radio message, a simple, defiant statement of purpose, was picked up. "My mind is made up. I will attack." They descended to wave-top height, committed to their low-level run. The Japanese Zeros, waiting high above, screamed down upon them. It was a pure, unadulterated massacre. The Zeros, fast, armored, and piloted by the best in the world, tore through the slow denominators like paper. The air filled with tracers, the smell of burning oil, and the terrible sound of tearing metal. The torpedo bombers pressed on, one after another, attempting to drop their weapons, drawing fire away from the rest of the fleet. There were no misses, no escape.
It was a staggering, heart-shattering loss. We paid a price in blood that morning that felt ruinous. But those lost pilots, those brave men in their aluminum coffins, had achieved their one vital, magnificent task. They forced the Japanese Zero fighters down to sea level. The Zeros, after finishing off the low-flying torpedo bombers, were now dispersed and dangerously low. To regain their tactical advantage, they had to climb thousands of feet to reform the Combat Air Patrol, CAP. The Japanese carrier decks were still littered with ordnance and planes, waiting for the return of the Midway strike force. They were perfectly exposed, and the Combat Air Patrol, the only defense they had, was out of position and scrambling upwards uselessly, thousands of feet below the sun. The stage was set for the miracle. The sacrifice of Torpedo 8 had opened the window of destiny. Part 6. The 3 Minutes of Destiny. The clock ticked past 10 a.m. The sun was high, baking the flight decks. Naval was about to launch his counterstrike, a blow that would surely end the war. The search and the wake. Lieutenant Commander C. Wade McCluskey, leading the Enterprise dive bombers, was running on fumes and despair. He had flown far past his target point, searching an empty ocean for nearly 3 hours. The Japanese, having changed course to avoid our previous unsuccessful attacks, were nowhere to be found. His planes were low on gas. He faced the agonizing choice to turn back or risking running out of fuel and ditching the plane in the vast Pacific. It was our moment of desperate faith. McCluskey was about to signal the retreat when he saw it. A solitary thin white line cutting through the deep blue, the wake of a Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, speeding toward the northeast. The destroyer had detached from the main fleet to hunt an American submarine and was now rushing back to its post. McCluskey was a man of action and instinct. He made the leap of faith. The destroyer must be a guide. He banked sharply, leading his entire squadron, nearly 30 SBD Dauntless dive bombers, to follow the faint line of the destroyer's wake. The destiny of the entire war hung on that single, desperate 2-minute decision to trust his gut. The impossible convergence. The time was 10:20 a.m. At 10:22 a.m., they spotted them. The 4 great carriers of the codebreakers, sailing in a perfect diamond formation. It was a sight of impossible vulnerability. The decks were a madhouse, fully fueled, fully armed, with planes everywhere, ready to launch their devastating counterstrike. At the exact same moment, a convergence that history still struggles to explain. We're approaching from a different, unexpected angle, where the dive bombers of the Yorktown, VB-3, led by Lieutenant Commander Max Leslie. They too had been lost, searching for hours, and found the Japanese fleet at the precise moment of McCluskey's arrival. The Japanese command, focused on the last disastrous torpedo attack on the southern side, was looking the wrong way. The Zeros of the Cap were still struggling to climb high. The enemy was blind, deaf, and exposed. 10:24 a.m. The world held its breath. The whistling death. McCluskey pushed his stick forward. The Enterprise and Yorktown squadrons plummeted from 20,000 feet, descending at nearly 250 knots. The rushing air over the wings and fixed landing gear created an unearthly, screaming sound, the whistling death. The sound, high-pitched and terrifying, signaled the end of Japanese dominance. The attack was a cataclysmic, beautiful symphony of destruction, orchestrated by chance and paid for by the lives of the torpedo pilots. The Kaga was the first target. She took 4 direct hits. The first bomb crashed through the deck into the forward hangar, instantly igniting a sea of ready planes and fuel. The next bombs exploded the torpedoes and aircraft bombs scattered across the deck. She became a single, instantaneous, colossal explosion, a pillar of black smoke and white-hot fire, doomed in seconds. The Akagi, Nagamo's flagship, was attacked next. The Dauntlesses of Gallagher's squadron, finding the Kaga already burning, shifted their target to the massive flagship. 2 bombs struck her. One hit near the aft elevator, but the second one proved fatal. It hit the port edge of the deck and went straight into the fully loaded hangar bay, exploding in the midst of fueled-up aircraft. The secondary explosions were colossal, ripping the ship apart from the inside. Nagamo, stunned and barely surviving the blasts, was forced to transfer his command to a light cruiser, abandoning his burning dream. The Soryu received 3 crippling hits from the Yorktown's bombers. Her hangar deck, packed with ready ordnance, erupted. Within minutes, the fires were out of control, spreading from bow to stern. In the space of 6 minutes, a tiny, glorious sliver of time, 3 of the 4 heartbeats of the Japanese Navy were stopped cold. The tide of the war had not just turned, it had been violently, gloriously wrenched from the hands of the enemy. The genius of Rochefort, the tenacity of Waldron, the faith of Spruance, and the luck of McCluskey had all converged on this impossible, brilliant moment. Part 8. The Retaliation, Yorktown's Last Stand. The sheer shock of the disaster paralyzed the Japanese fleet. Their communications were severed, their command structures ruined, and their pride shattered. But one carrier remained intact, commanded by the fierce, aggressive Rear Admiral Taman Yamaguchi, the Hiryu, the Flying Dragon. Yamaguchi was a warrior of the highest order, and he refused to concede. "I still have 2 carriers left," he radioed, a lie to boost morale, since the other 3 were burning hulks. "We shall inflict a decisive blow." He understood that the winner of a carrier battle is the one who still has a flight deck. The first counterstrike. At 10:40 a.m., the Hiryu launched her counterstrike. Her remaining planes found the nearest target, the Yorktown, our magnificent, patched-up miracle ship. The Japanese pilots, flying with the fury of vengeance, delivered a devastating attack. 3 bombs struck the Yorktown dead center. The explosions tore through her flight deck, ruptured her fuel lines, and knocked out her boilers. The Yorktown went silent, dead in the water. We watched from the Enterprise and Hornet as the smoke climbed, holding our breath. The enemy believed they had achieved an exchange, 3 carriers for 3. They had no idea they had only found one of our carriers, the one that should have been sunk weeks ago. The crew's miracle. But the crew of the Yorktown refused to die. In another act of astonishing determination, repair parties swarmed the vessel. Damage Control, the unsung hero of the American Navy, went to work. They fought the fires, shored up the bulkheads, pumped water, and, against all logic, they got the engines going again. The list was stabilized. The Yorktown began making 19 knots, the smoke clearing. A new, small American flag was hoisted defiantly over the island. At 12:45 p.m., the Hiryu launched her second strike wave, armed with torpedoes. When they found the Yorktown steaming forward, they were astonished. She was back. They assumed they had found a second, fresh American carrier. This tragic misidentification, a direct result of the crew's ferocious repair efforts, gave the enemy false confidence but ensured the survival of the Enterprise and the Hornet. She was our shield, our supreme sacrifice. Part 8. The final.
The heat was so intense it warped her steel structure. Yamaguchi knew the end had come. The fires were uncontrollable, the damage terminal. He gave the order to abandon ship, then retired to the bridge with Captain Tomeo Kaku. They both tied themselves to the helm, choosing to go down with the magnificent doomed vessel, a final, somber act of samurai honor. The Hiryu sank in the pre-dawn hours of June 5th. Yamamoto's shattered pride. The Imperial Japanese Navy was left shell-shocked. Admiral Yamamoto, still steaming far to the west with his battle fleet, refused to believe the reports. 4 carriers, destroyed in minutes? The shock was physical. He planned a night surface engagement, desperate to salvage the situation, hoping to lure our surface ships into a traditional naval gunfight where he still held the advantage. But Nagumo's surviving captains, shattered by the loss of their command, urged retreat. Their air cover was gone. Their primary strike force was at the bottom of the ocean. To engage our ships without air superiority was suicide. Finally, late on June 5th, Yamamoto made the decision that sealed the strategic victory for us. He ordered the entire fleet to withdraw. The great, arrogant Japanese fleet that had steamrolled the Pacific for 6 months was running home, tail tucked, defeated not by brute force but by intellect and sheer fighting spirit. The price paid. The full casualty count was catastrophic for the enemy. 4 fleet carriers lost: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiruyu. 1 heavy cruiser lost, Mukuma, sunk later. 248 planes destroyed, including the cream of their air arm, pilots trained since the 1920s who were, quite simply, irreplaceable. The loss of these men was a strategic blow that extended far beyond the value of the carriers themselves. 3,057 men killed, a spiritual defeat that echoed across the entire Japanese nation. Our losses, while painful, were strategically sustainable. 1 carrier lost, Yorktown, our shield. 1 destroyer lost, Hammond, sunk with the Yorktown. 150 planes destroyed, 307 men killed. The trade was 4 of their finest carriers for 1 of our damaged ones. It was a victory of unthinkable magnitude, a statistical and spiritual reversal that changed the course of world history. Part 9. The Enduring Glory and the New War. Midway was a victory of intelligence, not just of steel. We won because we knew their move before they made it, and we positioned ourselves to counter it perfectly.
Rocheford's genius in that dim basement was the equal of any gun turret or torpedo tube. The cryptologists were the silent heroes who handed the victory to the fighting men. The unbreakable spirit. But more than intelligence, it was a victory of morale and sheer audacious grit. The history books tell the story of the ships and planes, but the true glory belongs to the men. The shipyard workers, the thousands of men and women who performed a miracle to send the Yorktown out, proving the unbeatable power of our American production and will. Admiral Spruance, the cold, brilliant tactician who gambled everything on the urgency of the attack, defying military doctrine and trusting his own singular judgment. John Waldron and Torpedo 8, the young men who flew their devastators into certain death, drawing the enemy Zeros down and sacrificing themselves to clear the skies for the decisive blow. Their memory is the heart of Midway. Wade McCluskey, the desperate low-fuel searcher who followed a wake and found destiny, leading the screaming Dauntlesses to the target at the exact perfect moment. The crew of the Yorktown, the sailors who fought the fires, brought their ship back to life and died defending the rest of the fleet, ensuring the Enterprise and Hornet could survive to fight another day. Midway did not end the war. Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa lay ahead, but Midway irrevocably changed the nature of the war. Before June 4, 1942, Japan was the aggressor, dictating the conflict, untouchable. After June 4th, the initiative passed to us. They were forced onto the defensive, fighting a grinding war of attrition they could not win against our roaring industrial might. The Japanese Navy would never again be able to mount a major offensive. It was the point where the scales tipped, where the potential of our nation, our engineering, our intelligence, our raw courage met and overcame the greatest military machine the Pacific had ever known. It was a battle fought in a great atmosphere of strain, desperation, and total commitment. We had come close to losing everything, but in that terrifying proximity to annihilation, we found our finest, most glorious hour. The flag we flew over those tiny, smoking atolls meant something new that day. It meant we were unbreakable. It meant we were coming home. That is the story, in all its dramatic, glorious detail. The 3-minute window that gave us the Pacific. It is a story of how we won the most improbable, magnificent victory in the history of naval warfare.